Never believe that blood is thicker than water. In the elite world of power worshippers, blood is a cheap fluid easily wiped away with a paper bill. My own mother threw me onto the street like family trash with a crumpled $100 bill. 8 years later, I returned as their most ruthless creditor, yet, facing absolute destruction, their ultimate greed set one final trap. Listen closely, because the price of revenge is never paid in cash. Hello and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. As you may know, YouTube recently disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us completely without a budget to continue bringing you these tales. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even longer, more intensely detailed, and feature multiple emotional voice actors bringing the situations to life in ways we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or comments below. Now, let us begin today's story, where you will meet a woman named Hazel Turner. The air inside the Manhattan penthouse was always meticulously climate-controlled, yet it felt as suffocating as a vacuum. I stood perfectly still on the center of a vast expanse of imported Italian marble, feeling the chill seep through the thin soles of my shoes. I was 24 years old, but in that colossal room, I was nothing more than a failed investment. This was the fortress of the Turner family, the undisputed puppet masters of the luxury fashion empire known as Sterling Vanguard. Standing opposite me was Eleanor Turner. She was my mother by biological definition, but in reality, she was the authoritarian queen of a dying dynasty. She wore a bespoke tailored suit that cost more than most working families earned in one full year. Her posture rigid, her eyes completely devoid of anything resembling maternal warmth. "Medical textiles," she sneered, the words dripping with absolute disgust. "You want to turn Sterling Vanguard into a glorified pharmacy?" With a flick of her perfectly manicured wrist, she tossed a single, crumpled $100 bill onto the pristine white mink rug separating us. The paper fluttered down like a dead leaf, a vibrant green stain against the immaculate white fur. "Your little science project is a blasphemy to high art." "Hazel," Eleanor said, her voice echoing off the vaulted, gold-leaf ceiling. "We sell aspiration. We sell exclusivity. We do not cater to the sick, the weak, or the practical." The tension in that room had been building for months, but tonight was the breaking point. Behind the glittering runway shows and the celebrity endorsements, Sterling Vanguard was bleeding money, suffocated by its own archaic business model and a string of toxic public relations disasters. Eleanor had engineered a desperate lifeline, a strategic, commercial marriage between me and the brain-dead heir of a massive global retail chain. It was a transaction, pure and simple. My absolute freedom in exchange for an injection of fresh capital to save her sinking ship. "I will not marry him," I said, my voice steady despite the violent adrenaline pounding in my chest. "And I will not let you sell me off like surplus inventory to fix a balance sheet you destroyed." Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of pure ice. There was no screaming, no dramatic weeping, no shattered glass. In the world of the ultra-rich, destruction is always delivered in a quiet, measured whisper. "Then you are no longer a Turner," she stated, her tone as casual as if she were returning a defective handbag to a boutique. "You are stripped of your inheritance, your trust fund, and your name. Get out of my sight, and leave anything with our logo behind. You do not get to wear my brand while you drag yourself through the gutter." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, searching for a single flicker of hesitation or regret. There was absolute zero. I was being discarded like a piece of defective fabric on the cutting room floor. I slowly knelt on the soft mink rug. I reached out and picked up that crumpled $100 bill. I did not take it out of desperation, and I certainly did not take it out of humiliation. I took it because I needed a physical anchor for the absolute rage crystallizing in my veins. I needed a tangible reminder of exactly how little my blood was worth to them. Without breaking eye contact, I folded the bill carefully and slid it behind the clear plastic case of my phone. I turned my back on Eleanor Turner, walked across the freezing marble floor, and pushed open the heavy gilded doors of the penthouse. I stepped into the private elevator and watched the polished metal doors slide shut, severing the only life I had ever known. I walked out of the building with nothing but the unbranded clothes on my back, a phone, and a single piece of currency. I did not stay in New York. I knew I needed to disappear to a place where pedigree meant nothing and innovation meant everything. I walked through the freezing rain to the station and used a fraction of my remaining cash to buy the cheapest bus ticket available. My destination was Austin, Texas. It was a rising tech hub, a universe away from the velvet ropes and champagne flutes of Manhattan. As the rusted bus rattled down the interstate, leaving the glittering, unforgiving skyline of New York City behind in the darkness, I looked at the $100 bill pressed against my phone. I was heading south with a singular, burning ambition. I was going to reshape exactly what the world wears on its skin, and I was going to make sure the Turner Empire choked on every single thread. Austin hit me like a wall of humid heat and harsh realities. I arrived with nothing but the clothes on my back and a head full of complex formulas that no one wanted to hear. I spent my first 2 weeks knocking on the glass doors of every tech startup and materials laboratory in the city. They looked at my resume, saw the history of a fashion dropout with no formal engineering degree, and immediately showed me the door. Without a steady income, my meager savings evaporated in a matter of days. I found shelter in the back room of a dilapidated dry cleaning shop on the industrial edge of the city. The owner, a tired man drowning in overhead costs, struck a simple deal with me. I worked the night shift entirely unpaid, loading heavy machines, scrubbing stains, and folding garments until my fingers bled. In exchange, he let me sleep on a cracked vinyl sofa in the storage room. The air in that windowless space was permanently thick with the harsh, chemical sting of perchloroethylene and boiling steam. Life became an exercise in brutal endurance. There were weeks where my entire diet consisted of nothing but instant ramen noodles and lukewarm tap water from the utility sink. My ribs began to show, and my cheap clothes hung loosely on my fading frame. Yet, every single night, before I closed my eyes on that reeking sofa, I would take out my phone and stare at the $100 bill pressed behind the clear case. It was no longer a piece of currency. It was a battery. It was a pure, concentrated block of spite that kept my heart beating and my mind completely sharp. During the day, when I was not chained to the industrial presses, I scavenged. Austin was a booming tech hub, which meant its industrial outskirts were a goldmine of discarded electronics. I dug through towering mountains of electronic waste under the blistering Texas sun. I salvaged microscopic sensors from broken fitness trackers, stripped conductive copper threads from dead server racks, and bought the cheapest synthetic polymer chemicals I could find from industrial liquidators. My laboratory was a wobbly folding table wedged between 2 broken washing machines. I was building something the world had never seen. I was weaving the first prototype of a smart fabric capable of fundamentally altering its own molecular structure based on human biometric feedback. If your heart rate spiked, the fabric would adjust its weave to increase airflow. If your body temperature rose in a specific localized area, the microthreads would actively expand to relieve pressure and activate a chemical cooling effect. It was agonizing work. I burned my fingertips raw while soldering microscopic joints. I ruined dozens of fabric swatches, choking on toxic fumes when the volatile polymers reacted violently. But piece by piece, the prototype slowly came together. The turning point arrived on a suffocatingly hot Tuesday afternoon. The bell above the dry cleaner door chimed, and a man walked in holding a plastic bag full of oversized cotton shirts. His name was Caleb. He was a former firefighter, and his body was a living map of tragedy. A massive chemical fire 2 years prior had left him with severe third-degree burns covering his entire torso and left arm. Even standing still, I could see the agonizing stiffness in his posture. He moved with a rigid, unnatural caution, his face tight with chronic pain. "I need these shirts taken out," Caleb said, his voice raspy and exhausted. "The seams, I need them as wide as possible. The medical gauze underneath catches on the fabric, and the friction is tearing my skin back open. I looked at the cheap cotton shirts in his hand, and then I looked at his scarred, heavily bandaged arm. A sudden, intense clarity washed over me. I told him to keep his money. I told him to come back in exactly 48 hours. I spent the next 2 days entirely without sleep. I took the raw, untested smart fabric I had been developing and painstakingly tailored it into a seamless, compression-style shirt. I calibrated the bioresponsive threads specifically to detect the heat signatures of severe skin inflammation. When Caleb returned, I handed him the dark gray garment. He looked at it with heavy skepticism, but his sheer desperation won out. He went into the small bathroom to change. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started to worry the conductive threads had short-circuited and burned him. When the door finally opened, Caleb was staring down at his own chest, tears streaming down his heavily scarred face. "It does not hurt," he whispered, his voice trembling violently. "For the first time in 2 years, it does not hurt." The moment the shirt touched his inflamed skin, the fabric had instantly detected the elevated temperature of his burn sites. The weave had automatically loosened over the wounds to eliminate friction, while simultaneously lowering the surface temperature to soothe the damaged nerve endings. It was functioning flawlessly. Caleb wore that prototype to his next physical therapy session. The drastic reduction in his inflammation and his sudden, massive improvement in mobility completely stunned his medical team. The very next morning, the bell to the dry cleaner rang again. It was not a customer bringing in dirty laundry. It was Caleb's lead reconstructive surgeon. The doctor walked past the racks of cheap suits, ignored the chemical smell of the shop, and looked directly at me. He examined the microscopic weaving of Caleb's shirt with wide, disbelieving eyes. The doctor did not see a neat sewing trick. He saw a medical revolution. He saw a technology with a clear, undeniable value of over $1 billion, and he knew exactly who he was looking at. He was looking at the future. With the reconstructive surgeon actively backing my claims and documenting the miraculous recovery of my very first patient, I finally had the concrete leverage I needed. I filed the initial patents, burying the most crucial chemical formulas deep within complex legal jargon, and officially registered my enterprise. I named it Synapse Loom to the outside world, and specifically to any prying corporate spies from the East Coast. We looked like a boutique, fiercely independent textile manufacturer operating out of a dusty, leased warehouse on the edge of town. In reality, behind those locked metal doors, we were operating a highly advanced, weaponized biomaterials laboratory. But possessing a revolutionary, world-changing prototype and securing the actual capital to manufacture it at a global scale are two entirely different universes. What followed was a brutal education in corporate arrogance. For the next 8 agonizing months, I dragged myself into exactly 42 pitch meetings with traditional venture capital firms across Texas and California. The reception I received was universally condescending and completely ruthless. I was a young woman with absolutely no pedigree, no prestigious engineering degree, standing in freezing boardrooms full of men in $5,000 suits who looked at me like I was selling cheap magic tricks. They casually flicked through my data. They laughed openly at the projected production costs. They called the concept of mass-producing bioresponsive smart fabric a complete pipe dream. They told me that the textile industry was a dead space and advised me to go back to a fashion school where I belonged. I walked out of 42 different glass buildings with exactly $0 and an ever-growing reservoir of pure, unadulterated spite. The rejections did not break me. They only proved how completely blind the old guard really was. The ultimate breakthrough did not happen in a sterile, perfectly manicured boardroom. It happened in the crowded, suffocatingly hot basement of a rogue technology convention in downtown Austin. I had drained the absolute last of my operational funds to secure a tiny, unlit exhibition booth entirely at the back of the hall. Squeezed between drone manufacturers and software developers, I knew I could not pitch to them with standard pie charts. I had to show them violence. I set up a dynamic ballistic gel model, anatomically shaped exactly like a human thigh. I connected it to a heavy-duty mechanical pump, pushing crimson synthetic fluid at the exact high pressure of a severed femoral artery. I wrapped a thick swatch of my advanced prototype fabric securely around the synthetic limb. When a decent crowd finally gathered, I slammed my fist onto the release valve. The crimson fluid erupted violently, but before the fake blood could even splash the display table, the fabric reacted. The microsensors woven into the threads instantly detected the sudden drop in surface tension and the catastrophic liquid pressure. In less than 2 seconds, the weave violently contracted. It snapped tight against the synthetic flesh with bone-crushing force, functioning as an automated, immediate tourniquet. The aggressive bleeding stopped instantly. The gel model was perfectly sealed. The crowd around my booth went completely, chillingly silent. Then, a man shoved his way aggressively to the front of the pack. He was wearing faded denim jeans and a vintage rock band shirt, completely ignoring the unspoken corporate dress code of the event. This was Marcus. He was a notorious, highly eccentric technology billionaire known across the globe for making completely unhinged but terrifyingly accurate bets on emerging scientific markets. He did not ask for a 50-page business plan. He did not ask about my educational background or my previous revenue models. He just stared intensely at the crushed gel model and the completely dry table. "How much capital do you need to scale this to global production right this second?" Marcus demanded. His eyes locked entirely on the fabric, completely ignoring my face. I did not blink. I did not hesitate. $15 million, I replied, my voice slicing through the noise of the convention hall. Marcus pulled a battered phone out of his pocket, typed a rapid message to his wealth management team, and finally looked up at me. "Done. The funds will wire in 24 hours. You have your $15 million. Do not make me regret this." That massive, the sudden injection of capital was the single spark that ignited a total revolution. Synapse Loom immediately moved out of the dusty warehouse and into a massive, state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. We hired the brightest chemical engineers in the country. We perfected the core technology, reinforcing the synthetic polymers, and officially trademarked the proprietary material under the name Aegis Weave. It was no longer just a fragile prototype. It was a fully scalable, practically indestructible reality. The company exploded with a violent, unstoppable momentum that terrified our competitors. The United States Department of Defense caught wind of the tourniquet demonstration and immediately locked us into an exclusive multi-billion-dollar contract to line their combat uniforms entirely with Aegis Weave. We were literally saving soldiers bleeding out on foreign battlefields before the field medics could even reach their positions. From there, the global hospital networks came begging on their knees. We manufactured surgical wraps that actively prevented post-operative infections, burn compression garments that accelerated cellular regeneration by 50%, and diabetic socks that monitored blood circulation in real time, alerting doctors before tissue necrosis could even begin. The passage of exactly 8 years felt like a single, blinding lightning strike. Synapse Loom was no longer a scrappy startup. It was an undisputed, terrifying titan of the biotechnology industry. Financial magazines were frantically trying to estimate our market value, throwing around numbers that easily surpassed $3 billion. My own personal liquid net worth officially crossed the $100 million threshold. I had more absolute power, influence, and capital than I could have ever imagined during my darkest, starving days sleeping in the back of that chemical-reeking dry cleaner. Yet, despite sitting on top of a mountain of wealth, I remained completely invisible. I refused all high-profile media interviews. I never allowed my photograph to be published in any press release, financial report, or industry magazine. To the outside world, the visionary founder and chief executive officer of Synapse Loom was a total ghost. Absolutely no one in the media, and absolutely no one in the elite, snobbish circles of New York high society, knew that the architect of this unstoppable billion-dollar empire was the exact same girl who had been thrown onto the street for a single piece of paper money. I remained completely hidden in the shadows, quietly sharpening my knives, waiting patiently for my perfect moment to strike the killing blow. The fallout was catastrophic. Their flagship retail stores across Europe and Asia were hit with massive protests. Sales plummeted by over 60% in a single fiscal quarter to keep the sinking ship afloat. Eleanor had taken out massive, high-interest loans, leveraging the remaining assets of the company just to maintain the illusion of solvency. The Turner family legacy was drowning in over $400 million of toxic debt. I did not let this opportunity slip away. I had spent 8 years waiting for the ice to crack, and now the entire frozen lake was collapsing. I deployed a sophisticated network of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Luxembourg. Working entirely through aggressively ruthless proxy lawyers, I began quietly buying up Sterling Vanguard's bad debt for pennies on the dollar. At the same time, I initiated a stealth acquisition of their plummeting public shares. I kept my purchases strictly under the legal threshold that would trigger a mandatory Securities and Exchange Commission disclosure. I moved like a ghost through the financial markets, tightening a microscopic thread around Eleanor's neck. By the time my proxies were finished, I secretly owned 51% of all voting shares and held the exclusive rights to every single major loan keeping their lights on. I was their undisputed executioner, and they did not even know my name. Eleanor was backed into a corner of pure desperation. Her pride was entirely shattered. My intelligence team intercepted communications showing she was frantically trying to contact the mysterious venture capital consortium that was swallowing her company whole. She was begging for a face-to-face meeting, pleading for a dignified merger that would allow her to retain her title as chief executive officer and save the family name from total public humiliation. My lead proxy lawyer finally replied, offering her a single non-negotiable meeting in her own boardroom. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of a mirror in my luxury hotel suite overlooking Central Park. I was no longer the starving, terrified 24-year-old girl. I dressed for war. I wore a bespoke, razor-sharp suit, tailored completely from midnight black Aegis weave. As I slipped it on, the intelligent fibers instantly adjusted to my rising body temperature, keeping my skin perfectly cool and my heart rate steady. It was absolute, indestructible armor. I arrived at the Sterling Vanguard headquarters precisely on time. I bypassed the receptionist, walked straight into the private elevator, and pressed the button for the executive floor. The doors slid open to reveal the exact same suffocating, cedar-lined hallway I had been banished from nearly a decade ago. I walked directly toward the heavy double oak doors of the main boardroom and pushed them wide open without knocking. The air in the room was instantly paralyzed. 12 board members, consisting of old men in outdated suits, sat around a massive mahogany table. They were sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights, clutching worthless financial reports. At the absolute head of the table sat Eleanor Turner. She looked dramatically older, the severe lines of stress carving deep canyons into her perfectly manicured face. She was holding a heavy gold-plated fountain pen, waiting to surrender to a faceless corporate raider. I walked slowly down the entire length of the room. The only sound was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the hardwood floor. I stopped directly across from her. I did not smile. I did not blink. I just stared down at the woman who had traded my existence for a balance sheet. Eleanor looked up, her expression shifting from polite corporate submission to absolute, unadulterated horror. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her hand began to tremble violently. The heavy gold pen slipped from her fingers and crashed loudly onto the polished mahogany table, rolling off the edge and hitting the floor with a dull thud. She tried to speak, but her throat only produced a choked, pathetic wheeze. She was staring at the billionaire ghost who now owned her entire life, realizing it was the exact same daughter she had thrown out with a single piece of crumpled currency. I placed my hands flat on the table and leaned in, my voice devoid of any human warmth. "There will be no merger," I stated, the words cutting through the dead silence like a scalpel. "This is a full, hostile acquisition. By 5 o'clock this evening, The brand name Sterling Vanguard will be legally dissolved and permanently erased from the New York Stock Exchange. Every single corporate asset will be liquidated, and you, Eleanor, are stripped of your title, your shares, and your access to this building, effective right this second. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your desk before security physically escorts you out of my property. I expected the board members to scramble. I expected Eleanor to finally break, to weep, or to beg for mercy. I had spent 8 entire years visualizing this exact moment, anticipating the sweet, intoxicating rush of absolute victory. But the universe has a sickening sense of humor. Eleanor did not collapse. The color slowly returned to her face. She leaned back into the plush leather of her executive chair, interlaced her fingers, and a slow, chillingly malicious smile stretched across her lips. Then, she raised her hands. She began to clap. The slow, rhythmic sound of her applause bounced off the oak walls, mocking the heavy silence of the room. "Brilliant," Eleanor whispered, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "Absolutely brilliant. You truly thought you could walk in here, wearing your little sci-fi suit, and play God with my legacy. You always were painfully naive." She reached down into her designer leather briefcase resting on the floor. She pulled out a massive, heavily bound stack of legal documents and slammed it aggressively onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud vibrated through the wood. "You see, my dear," Eleanor continued, standing up slowly to tower over the table, "I have known exactly who was behind this hostile takeover for the past 6 months. Did you honestly believe your shell companies in the Cayman Islands were completely invisible? I practically invented corporate warfare, and while you were busy buying up my bad debt, I was busy securing your entire future." She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against the thick folder. "These are certified, court-admissible documents. They contain the original, foundational chemical structures and algorithmic blueprints for your precious Aegis weave. The only problem is, according to these sworn affidavits and registered timestamps, those designs do not belong to you. They belong to a defunct medical research and development division that Sterling Vanguard temporarily funded over a decade ago. According to the law, you did not invent anything. You stole proprietary corporate data, ran away to Texas, and built a billion-dollar empire on stolen intellectual property." The air in my lungs turned to solid ice. I stared at the folder, my mind racing through thousands of secure servers and encrypted files. It was legally impossible. The core formulas were locked in my own head for years before I ever put them on a digital drive. But as I looked into Eleanor's dead, triumphant eyes, the horrifying truth began to materialize. "Your lead corporate attorney," Eleanor said, savoring every single syllable as if it were a fine wine. "Such a brilliant, ambitious man, but ultimately, like everyone else in this world, he had a price. Exactly 2 years ago, when Synapse Loom was filing its most critical international patents, I reached out to him. For a very generous sum deposited into a blind offshore trust, he agreed to do a little administrative favor. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. My own lawyer, the man who had sat at my dining table, who had drafted my most secure contracts, had sold me to the slaughterhouse." Eleanor paced slowly around the table, a predator circling a wounded animal. "He buried backdated files deep within your patent applications. He legally intertwined your completely original work with our old, worthless research data. He fabricated a perfect, unbroken chain of evidence proving that every single thread of your smart fabric was conceptualized in our laboratories while you were still living under my roof. You are not a pioneer. In the eyes of the federal government, you are nothing more than a common thief who committed catastrophic corporate espionage." The 12 board members, who had been sweating in terror just 5 minutes ago, were now sitting up straight. Smirks began to form on their wrinkled faces. The power dynamic in the room had violently inverted in the blink of an eye. I was no longer the executioner. I was the prey caught in a velvet-lined trap completely filled with poison. "Here is your reality," Eleanor hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive perfume radiating off her skin. I have a team of federal prosecutors waiting by their phones right now. If I give the signal, they will file an emergency injunction. Every single one of your personal bank accounts, your entire $100 million fortune, your corporate assets, and your manufacturing facilities will be instantly frozen. You will be arrested before the sun sets today. Economic espionage of this magnitude carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. She slid a single, crisp white sheet of paper across the table, followed by the gold-plated fountain pen she had dropped earlier. It was an absolute, unconditional deed of transfer. "Sign it," she commanded, her voice turning hard and entirely devoid of mercy. "Transfer 100% of your equity in Synapse Loom to the Turner Family Holding Group. Surrender the patents. Walk away with absolutely nothing, just like you did 8 years ago. If you sign, I will make this legal nightmare disappear. And you get to keep your freedom. If you refuse, I will burn your entire life to the ground and take your company from you while you rot in a concrete cell." A sickening wave of despair washed over me. I looked at the legal transfer document, and then up at the monstrous woman standing before me. The bitter, suffocating truth of the universe was laid completely bare in that moment. This family had learned absolutely nothing. Confronted with the complete destruction of their own making, their immediate instinct was not remorse, but extreme, cannibalistic greed. They were perfectly willing to destroy their own flesh and blood a second time, using the most vile, underhanded tactics imaginable, just to steal the fruits of my agonizing labor and save their hollow empire. I stood completely silent. My face grew noticeably pale. My hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table so tightly my knuckles turned entirely white. I let my shoulders drop, projecting the image of a thoroughly broken woman, all my desperate nights sleeping in chemical fumes, the agonizing burns on my fingers, the 8 brutal years of relentless sacrifice. It all seemed to be slipping through my fingers, hijacked by the very monsters I had sworn to destroy. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and heavy, suffocating every single drop of hope I had left. The heavy, suffocating silence hung in the room for exactly 10 seconds. Eleanor stood there, relishing what she believed was my absolute defeat. I looked down at the transfer deed, then up at the 12 smug men sitting around the mahogany table, and then I started to laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle or a hysterical sob. It was a loud, booming, entirely fearless laugh that echoed off the cedar walls and shattered the tension into a million jagged pieces. The smirks on the board members' faces vanished instantly. Eleanor stepped back, her eyes narrowing in sudden confusion. "Are you having a psychotic break?" Eleanor demanded, her voice losing its venomous edge and slipping into genuine uncertainty. I did not answer her immediately. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my phone. I snapped off the clear plastic case. Lying flat against the back of the device was the exact same crumpled $100 bill she had thrown at my feet 8 years ago. I picked up the paper currency, stepped forward, and threw it directly into Eleanor's face. The bill fluttered uselessly against her cheek and landed right on top of her fake extortion documents. "You really think you invented corporate warfare?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You think you are the only one who plans ahead?" I placed my hands back on the table, no longer playing the victim. "My company develops intelligent materials. Did you honestly believe our internal cybersecurity was run by amateurs? Our artificial intelligence monitoring system flagged your little traitorous lawyer exactly 14 months ago. I knew he was compromised the very second he opened a secure offshore bank account." Eleanor's face twitched. "You are lying. The documents are certified." "Oh, the documents he stole are very real." I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "But they are not the blueprints for Aegis Weave. The day I found out he was leaking data to you, I did not fire him. I used him. I isolated him in a sandbox server and let him steal thousands of pages of fabricated research. But I also embedded a highly aggressive, completely invisible Trojan virus deep within the metadata of those files." Gasps erupted from the men around the table. Eleanor froze completely. When you took those files and uploaded them to your legal network to build this pathetic blackmail case against me, I explained, spelling out her doom word by word, you manually bypassed your own corporate firewalls. You invited my Trojan directly into the Sterling Vanguard mainframe. It did not just scramble your fake evidence, it immediately went to work extracting the real evidence. I checked my watch. Exactly 20 minutes ago, when I walked into this building, my virus finished compiling every single hidden ledger, every offshore wire transfer, and every piece of definitive proof of your massive tax fraud and international money laundering. And then, it sent the entire unencrypted package directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As if summoned by my words, a faint, high-pitched wailing began to rise from the streets below. The wailing rapidly multiplied, turning into a deafening chorus of police sirens converging directly on our location. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect off the glass windows of the boardroom. Total pandemonium erupted. Board members shoved their chairs back, scrambling for their phones, shouting in absolute terror. They realized in one horrifying second that their own insatiable greed and pathetic deceit had literally pushed the button to activate their own prison sentences. Eleanor collapsed into her chair. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at the $100 bill resting on the mahogany table, finally understanding the true cost of her arrogance. The heavy oak doors burst open. A dozen federal agents in tactical gear flooded into the room, shouting orders and drawing zip ties. Eleanor Turner, you are under arrest, the lead agent barked, grabbing her wrist and yanking her out of her executive chair. The gold bracelets on her arms clinked against the cold metal handcuffs. I stood perfectly still, watching the empire of sin completely disintegrate. I was not destroying this building out of petty vengeance. I was purging it. By next year, this tower would be stripped of its hollow fashion logos and transformed into the largest advanced medical research center in the world. As the agents dragged a weeping Eleanor out of the room, I looked down at the table one last time. That old, crumpled $100 bill remained there, a silent witness to the fact that it had successfully purchased an entirely new empire, and the empty, arrogant fools who worshipped money above their own blood had finally paid the ultimate price using their own freedom. Hello again, and thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's journey thrilling and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to publish on YouTube. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or use the Patreon link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Thank you for standing with us, and I will see you in the next story.